what should be done about fake injuries in college football, and how can the NCAA stop this from getting worse? We'll discuss next. I'm Jay Smith, and this is After Further Review.
And now, after further review, a Clemson student's perspective on sports.
There's a personal foul on number 99 of the defense. After he tackled the quarterback, he's giving them business down there. That's a 15-yard penalty.
Well, welcome in, everyone. I'm Jay Smith, and this is After Further Review. Thanks so much for tuning into today's show. This is a really, I think, under-discussed topic that we're talking about here today, and that is fake injuries in college football. Now, this is something that's, been around. If you've watched college football really across any conference in the last, I'd say, good 5 to 7 years, you've probably seen at one point or two a questionable injury where a defense is on the. Usually, what happens here is a defense is on its heels. The offense is playing with tempo and momentum. Substitutions are hard for the defense to come by, and you see a guy go down. Usually it's a non-contact injury, and it's right before a snap, and that usually raises some eyebrows. It usually raises a little bit of suspicion. I actually posted a clip. It was a 2015 game between Texas and Cal, and Texas was essentially just caught faking an injury right before, I believe it was right before halftime, because Cal was driving. They were down inside the red zone at like the 1 yard line, and they're trying to get a score right before half, kind of get some more momentum, and you see the Texas player just kind of fall to the turf. But the odd thing about the clip is, if you haven't seen it, you should definitely go check it out on the AFR Instagram pages. The player kind of stands there on the line, starts to run off the field, right, because they're making substitutions. In this case, they're making substitutions. Texas realizes they have too many men on the field, so rather than trying to get a guy off or burning a timeout, they just tell him to go down. And you see him, he just he looks over to the sideline, starts running, then backpedals a couple steps, and then he just falls over, and it's like, how obvious do you want it to be, right? I mean, because this is blatant. I mean, this is blatant. Now, there's always another side of the discussion where it's you have to take every injury seriously, and certainly, you want to treat an injury or a potential injury with the same seriousness that you do for anything, right? So I understand, and that's what makes it so hard. That's why schools and officials and administrators have been put in a difficult situation, because it's a really bad, from a PR standpoint, it looks really bad if you're instituting rules that reduce, I guess, how medical staff or whoever or officials treat injuries, right? Because if you're out there questioning every time a guy goes down, I don't know if it's legit or not, he may be faking, like it kind of has this weird gray area in between. But again, the majority of these extremely obvious cases of faking injuries are always on defense. It's usually a guy that's not a star player. It's someone, because right now current state of the rules are, if you are injured or if you go down or if the medical staff has to come out to you and there's a official timeout for an injured player, I think that's what it's called, you have to come out for a play. So, of course, you're not going to have your star defensive end just go down, right? You're going to pick that guy that's, maybe filling in on the line, or maybe he's, not the best linebacker, whatever, but you're not going to take your star guy. So it's typically someone on defense who's not a star player, they can afford to lose, or they have depth at that position, and they just need to get a rotation in. They don't have time to substitute because of the tempo that the offense is playing at. So they're only option, because they don't want to burn a timeout, is, well, we're just going to have him fake an injury so we can get our guy in there. And it's a pretty ingenious strategy when you think about it. And this kind of opens up the discussion of, is this meant to be in the game? Are fake injuries good for the sport? Is it a good look for football? And should it be part of the game? Now, my personal opinion on this is it should not be part of the game. I don't think it's a good look for football. And most coaches across really college and professional agree. Now, you don't see this as often in the pros, mostly because offenses typically don't play with the same level of tempo. The pro game is a slower game. I mean, you see drives in the NFL every Sunday that might chew 8-9 minutes off the clock per drive, right? So that's something that is different between the pro game and the college game. So this is more of a college football issue. And yesterday, the American Football Coaches Association asked the NCAA Rules Committee to address players faking injuries when that committee meets next month. The AFCA Ethics Committee, again, the American Football Coaches Association, their ethics committee, voted in January to recommend that the committee address the practice, which has caused tension within the sport for years. This, again, is a quote from their release. And again, rather than using a timeout, you will see defensive players fake an injury to stop that clock, to kill that momentum of the opposing offense. And again, it's not. There's always that gray area, right? There's always the middle ground that's where the answer usually lies. And I think David Shaw from Stanford articulated this the best that I've seen from anybody. And he's basically on record saying, look, the rules, the current package, the current how the state of college football today is geared towards offense. Okay, we all know that. It's not just the Big 12. I mean, look at the SEC this past year, right? Look at what the SEC did on offense with Alabama and Ole Miss and other schools. So it's not just one specific conference. It's not just the Big 12. It's not just a regional thing. Up-tempo and high-scoring games are becoming the norm across college football. And every time a new rule is implemented, it does feel like it's slanted towards offense. And that gets into a deeper rabbit hole of, are they doing this to try and bring people back to the game, right? Because college football attendance is declining pre-COVID, right? We've done probably 2 shows on that topic in the past, and that was, golly, I think the first one we did was back in 2016 or 2017. When AFR first got started, was what are colleges going to do about attendance? Attendance is going down at most schools around the country. And that was 3-4 years pre-COVID. Scoring points, moving the football, big plays, that's seen as more exciting than Alabama and LSU ending up with a final score of 9-6 and kicking 5 field goals. Right? Watch. Perfect comparison here. Watch Texas A&M and LSU in 7th overtime, 70. Pulling this from memory here, 74, 72, I think, or maybe 76, 74. It was in the 70s. That game, 7 overtimes, 9-6 LSU, Alabama. Only a few years apart. But which one would you rather watch? You'd probably rather watch the game that went into 7 overtimes and was the highest scoring game in NCAA history, and I believe the longest game in NCAA history. Again, I'm pulling that from memory, but that's just what popped into my head when I'm thinking about this. Is okay. Look, those are 2 extremes. Those are I recognize those are 2 complete extremes, right? You have one that's on one hand the highest scoring game in history, and then on another one you have what's largely considered the greatest game where both teams scored less than 10 points. It's a weird matchup because LSU Alabama was 1-2 game of the century hype, and it was 9-6. But the defenses were unbelievable. The defenses were outstanding. You look at the LSU A&M game, defensive caliber wasn't there. It wasn't there. But again, the rules have changed since that 9-6 matchup. And so that kind of, brings us back around to this discussion that David Shaw points out, or this point that David Shaw makes is listen, the rules right now are slanted towards offensive points and scoring and fast pace and tempo, and it really has become an art to faking injuries. And there's actually some really interesting pieces out there that I've found that kind of talk with former college football players. Usually they discuss, with anonymity, they don't like revealing which schools they played for and all that. And that's understandable because it is a bit of a black eye. Now, I'll be the first to admit, everybody's doing this. Everybody's doing this. Okay, Ole Miss does it. Clemson does it. Alabama, everybody does this to some degree. No one is immune from needing to catch a break on defense and telling a guy, hey, go down. It happens everywhere. Okay, you got to get, the fan bias, and my team would never. No, trust me, man. It's going on everywhere. Now, in some places it is worse. Maybe in some places it's more encouraged behavior. But the reality is that this is a part of the game that I've really seen going back to almost 2010, and I think something definitely needs to be done. I don't know, and we'll get into some of the suggestions that I've got for this a little bit later. But I think something does need to be done. I think there needs to be some sort of penalty in place that deters teams from doing this. More than just you got to sit out a play. But again, going back to the articles that I've found about the kind of the art of faking injuries, there's one player here. This is a direct quote. When asked, how often do players fake injuries? And this is, again, direct quote from him. He says, in a game, all the time. All the time. And then when he was asked, have you ever done it? He said, have I ever faked one? Yes, I did once. And it was a few years back. He said he was playing Patrick Mahomes in Texas Tech. If you didn't watch Patrick Mahomes in college, he was about as good there as he was at Kansas City. Their offense was spectacular, and this guy is saying that his coach would tell us that if we look to the sideline and someone gives us the finger in the shape of a gun signal, which that's a whole nother can of worms, one of us has to go down. Now, there have actually been instances before where multiple players have gone down at the same time, like non-contact injuries between plays where they can't substitute, and you just see two players kind of hobble, and then they'll look over and realize, oh, you're the one going down. Okay, I need to recover and pretend like I'm fine. Like, it's really it's good acting. I mean, I'm not saying you're going to get credit for it, as an elective on your transcript, but it's pretty impressive sometimes how theatrical these guys are. Now, this comes nowhere close to the flopping we see in basketball or the theatrics we see in soccer. I mean, honestly, those two sports have it much worse. I think flopping in basketball and the theatrics of soccer are really some of the worst things about those respective sports. Because there was even a clip I saw on Twitter the other day, and it was LeBron James. He had been fined, or there was some sort of penalty for his flop in a game recently. And I don't keep up with the NBA at all, but it's everywhere. It's everywhere. That being said, though, specifically with college football, and back to this article, this guy says I grabbed my upper hamstring, went down, said I had a cramp. he waited a little bit. They stretched him out. He got back up, started jogging off the field, and when his teammates looked him in the eye, I mean, they all knew. He said they all knew, and the look, that nonverbal look, was just thank you, man, just thanks. And again, that happens all the time. Happens all the time. You've got players admitting it happens all the time. Now, obviously, there are some injuries that are legitimate, of course, and they should be taken with all the precautions and that they are. But I think faking injuries is certainly a gray area of the game, but it's something that needs, I think, to be it needs to be looked at in terms of what's going to be the penalty, what's a team going to have to face if they're caught doing this, because for a few years I kind of thought, this won't catch on, this won't become mainstream, this won't soon be a little feather in the cap for all these different teams across college football, and that's unfortunately not been the case. It has grown in popularity. I'd say on any given Saturday, I wouldn't be surprised if there were at least 4 to 5 of these. And that's probably a conservative estimate, because I feel, as most people do, right? You feel a little bit, self-conscious when you're trying to watch a game and the game's being played right. The offense has got the ball. They might be up big. It might be a close game, whatever. But they're moving with tempo, and then all of a sudden, after a big chunk play, you just see a defensive player just kind of roll on the grass. And as a fan watching, now a lot of times, I'm not a huge fan of either team playing, because I just watch college football for the love of it, right, for the sport. So, if I'm watching Oregon and Cal, I don't care who wins. I don't really care who wins. But if I see something like that, even I'm just kind of like, well, like, is that real? Like, was he really injured? Like, and sometimes you don't see. That's the other thing that I think a lot of people don't always think about, is, typically, and I've worked in production and I've done enough live television to know the format of, in football, there is a replay after every snap. Okay? Quarterback snaps the ball, hands it off, runs up the middle, whatever. There's a replay. During that replay is typically, because, right, that's between plays, between snaps, when substitutions. Nobody wants to see the guys run off the field. Okay, you're only going to see a substitution if you come out of replay and you're still not ready to snap the ball. Again, I've done this for several years, so I can tell you how it works. When you come out of replay, you either go back to your wide cam because you're about to shoot the next play starting. Sometimes they have to come out of a replay quick, right, because they're ready to snap the ball because of the up-tempo. Well, again, kind of proving my point here, you'll see guys go down during that replay window. So you're not, we're at home. We can't see what happened. We come out of replay, and they go, oh, there's, number 42 is down on the turf. He hasn't gotten up, and you're like, oh, what happened? And so unless someone's shooting that player in that moment, you're probably not going to have a good replay of it, right? And then there's the whole other thing of if he does fake an injury, like, do you show that? And so I feel like that's something that a lot of people do forget about, is that a lot of this is happening between the play, and between the play, we are shown the replay to keep us interested and engaged in the game, right? Because that makes us feel like there's constant action. In reality, like, for college football, it's like, I think it's like 20 minutes, maybe 15 to 20 minutes of actual game time. Like in a whole 3.5 hour football game, like 15 to 20 minutes of it's actual plays, which is crazy if you think about it. But that's how it works. And so again, we're showing those replays, and we're not able to always see what happens. But whatever the case, right? Whatever the case, this is about saving the defense, and it's about not wasting a timeout. Someone going down to help the team, someone who's expendable, as we've discussed, someone who's not a key component of that defense, who can go out for a play, and a couple players made interesting comments in these pieces, and they basically said, this isn't really viewed, at least internally on the team and by peers. This isn't viewed as a a bad thing. It's not looked down upon because essentially you're sacrificing for your team. You're not getting in the middle of the pile. You're not blowing up a run play. You're taking yourself out of the game to slow the tempo down to allow your teammates catch their breath, get things figured out with the play calls, signals, whatever, and try and hold the offense back. So, I mean, again, you definitely have to be aware of the fact that this particular part of the game is not viewed negatively by some of the people playing it. Now, you go to offense, go ask quarterback, go ask somebody else, go ask an offensive coordinator. They're going to tell you they hate it. They hate it. They think it's terrible. They think it's immoral and unethical, whatever. And that shows you, again, both sides of the coin, and how it can be beneficial for again, the defensive side, and then it can totally destroy momentum for an offense. And I've seen that. If you've watched college football in the last few years, you have seen games where an offense was clicking, and all of a sudden a guy goes down, and they have to call timeout, and then when they come back, the offense goes 3-and-out, can't do anything, lose the momentum. It happens. College football is a huge momentum game. Most college sports are, and it's part of it. And so I feel like obviously because this is ramped up in severity the last few years, coaches, administrators, players have started taking note, and they've gotten together with the American Football Coaches Association and talked about this and proposed that there needs to be something done. I think that's the biggest the consensus that I've gotten here from reading and looking at reports on all this is that most people agree something needs to be done. Now, the specific what is it? What do we do? That's still kind of up in the air. Because, at some point, right, it's like we talked about at the very beginning of the show. How severe do you want these punishments to be, and how are you going to handle an injury that looks questionable? I mean, you again, from a medical perspective, you have to treat it like it's legitimate. But a guy just fall into the ground, I feel like definitely opens up a discussion on whether or not it was intentional. And I think in many cases it is. And again, David Shaw has probably been the most outspoken coach on this issue. And in fact, recently there was this was at a meeting with the national coordinator of officials, Steve Shaw. He showed a video to his committee member and some other coaches and sent out this tape, and it was basically a bunch of clips from games where defenses realized that they had the wrong formation or too many men on the field or whatever, couldn't make a substitution, and by the time they realized the mistake and the defender starts running towards the sideline, it's too late. It's too late to correct it. And so the offense is already in position to snap, and so instead you see a guy just drop. You see a guy drop. You see the official wait for an official timeout for an injury. Defense is able to recoup, and and they try and get back on their feet. So it's certainly become more prevalent in the last few years. It's certainly become more obvious. And I think that kind of leads us into a discussion now of, what should be done. What should be done? How do you deal with this issue? And actually put out a poll on Instagram the other day and got some responses from people on fake injuries and what should be done about it. Most people said, like Jake Newman, he said, fake injuries are from fake players. Players make plays. Another person pointed out specific games that had, some bad examples of, well, good depending on your definition, but they had examples of fake injuries. And a few people did talk about some punishments that could be instituted, and one that I feel might be a good middle ground is, listen, if you're going to have a guy go out for an injury, it needs to be the rest of that possession. If he goes out, he cannot come back in until a change of possession. Because, I've never really been a fan of, like the targeting rule disqualifies you not just from the game you're currently in, but also from like the first half, the next. Like I'm not a huge fan of that style. I think, and again, I don't think disqualification is the answer here. Okay, that's too severe of a penalty. I think that's the same case with targeting. That needs to be completely revamped, but that's a whole discussion for another day. This specific issue with faking injuries, I feel like if you require a player to sit out the remainder of that possession, especially if it's late in the game in the fourth quarter and the defense needs to make a stop, and he's, even if he's not the star player, he's still a starter, and he's still probably got more game experience and better awareness than anybody coming off the bench who hasn't played probably the entire game. And you make one of those players, one of those 11 sit out the rest of the possession, that'll make a coach think twice about, hey, do I want to take this 5-yard penalty, or do I want to lose my starting middle linebacker for the rest of this drive? And again, that's just my suggestion. That's just what I think you could do to try and make faking injuries have a more severe punishment. Because I think if you ramp up the punishment, you're probably going to see a decrease in how often it happens. What's really going to be challenging, though, is figuring out how you determine if the injury is legitimate or if it's fake or whatever. And, I feel like because that's such a gray area, it's better to just require anyone with an injury. Okay, if you're at the bottom of a pile and your helmet comes off, as the play's basically dead, and you gotta go off for a play, I think that's fine. As long as you're not staggering when you get up, it's not, you're fine to come back in after a play. But if you go down and team medical personnel have to either attend to you or assist you off the field, whether it's a fake injury or a real one, I think you should be out for the rest of the possession. And by having a blanket policy like that, you're going to be able to, I think, prevent most fake injuries. Because guys are going to realize, if I go down, I'm going to be out for the remainder of the possession. Now, if you want to play devil's advocate here, you could say, well, then guys are going to try and fight through injuries and possibly injure themselves even worse because they know that they won't be around for, the rest of that possession, right? They're not going to be able to play for another 10, 12 plays. And that's certainly a point that should be mentioned. But listen, officials have the ability to stop a game, right? If the defense gets set and the referee, the umpire's looking at that linebacker going, kid can't stand up, the official can blow the play dead and tell the linebacker, you've got to go off. You need to be checked out by the medical staff. That's a totally, that is completely within the jurisdiction of an official to stop the play, before the snap or whatever, and say, I think you need to go off. So again, it's a complicated issue. There's a lot of different ways that you could approach it, but I think having that policy of requiring people to go off for the remainder of the possession will curtail a lot of it, and allowing the officials to have some discretion on, okay, is this guy clearly not 100%, or does he appear to be all right? This is probably not going to get resolved next season, and it'll still be part of the game. As all those kind of gray area things are, right? They still exist. But I think this is a good step in the right direction, because we're seeing now for the first time college football as a whole looking at some rule changes to deter these fake injuries. And I've seen some different people propose some different ideas, and talk about how you could probably possibly curtail this. But I've seen examples. I posted the example of Texas. I've seen some from Notre Dame. I've seen them from Auburn. I think even Ole Miss did it a little bit last season. It's certainly a problem, and it's hard because as we discussed, right, you've got everything geared towards the offense anymore. And it's hard for a defense to feel like that they're going to have a fair chance when all these rules are geared towards offense and offensive production. And then again, you got to be cognizant of the fact that the player might really be hurt. But that one play rule is not enough. Now, some people have said make it a 2-minute rule. Make it 2 minutes. Treat it like a penalty box in hockey. That was actually another suggestion that I got from the Instagram poll, was treat it like the penalty box. Put them in the penalty box. If there's 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter, they got to stay in the penalty box until there's 4 minutes left, and make the penalty box a separate part of the field. So you can't receive coaching or you can't be part of the the play calling or whatever, the team signaling. Put it at one of the corners of the field or in the end zone or on the back end of the end zone. I don't know. You could try to do 15-yard penalties. I think a lot of it, though, is going to be hard to determine in the middle of a game. A lot of it's going to come down to post-game review and looking at the different camera angles to enforce it. You could, if you wanted to get really severe, if you were able to determine from video evidence of the prior game that a player faked an injury, he could be suspended for a quarter or a half of the next game. I mean, there are definitely options available for these coaches and administrators and officials to utilize. I mean, video replay. We've got video camera angles of everything now. I mean, a college football game typically has at least 10 to 12 different camera angles. So there's certainly options, but I think an important thing to remember to wrap up this discussion. An important thing to remember here is that this is not solely the players' fault. The players are being told by their coaches, hey, you need to go down. Hey, we're not ready. We're not set. We got 2 minutes on the field. Go down. So while the players are the ones doing, they're performing the action, they're not the ones that are being told to do it. So this also, the blame comes back to the coaches. It's going to be next to impossible to figure out which coach, told them to go down and what, different. I'm sure schools have different signals for. I know there's schools that have got to have specific signals for this, but they may just all vary depending on the school. But I think cameras are a key part of it. Officials, they're down on the field. They've got they're more immersed in it than we will ever be, because they are there physically. We're just kind of there virtually. But I think, a lot of it sounds right. A lot of this sounds complicated. A lot of it sounds like additional work for officials and administrators and everything. But listen, the example I showed on Instagram yesterday, that wasn't difficult to determine. It was obvious. It was egregious. It was completely, out there in the open. Anybody who was looking at the playing field when that happened would be able to go, what? Wait a minute now. Wait a minute. That didn't look right. So I think more often than not, you're going to curtail a lot of these obviously fake injuries if you institute some of these policies. But again, I appreciate the feedback from Instagram. That was a really, like I said, interesting. Got some really interesting responses and a great discussion with some people. So I appreciate people getting in their answers. But like I said, if you've got suggestions or if you've got ideas that you think the NCAA should institute for penalties regarding faking injuries, let me know, and we'll keep the discussion going. But it's certainly an interesting topic, and it's one that's not going away anytime soon. So we'll see what the NCAA does at their Rules Committee meeting next month. But I have a feeling that it'll probably take several years before we see a real decrease in the frequency of this issue. But either way, that's been it for this edition of After Further Review. Again, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. I'm Jay Smith, and this has been After Further Review.